Hello everybody and welcome. Today I'm going to be talking about a category of game that we have all been interested in, whether or not you know it. Today I'm going to be talking about how to get the most bang for your buck in games. That is to say, inexpensive games that give you a great experience, both in technical merits, that is to say gameplay aspects, as well as being flexible with the number of players and being good for however many players you've got. So with that, I'll get started with a couple of honorable mentions. My first honorable mention is a game that I've mentioned many times before in other videos, and it is also one of my favorite cooperative games ever. The game is Pandemic from Z-Man Games, my favorite publisher of all times. Now, why is it that Pandemic is one of the great cheap games? Well, first off, it is relatively inexpensive, and second off, you do get a great deal of playability from this. Not only that, you get a great deal of replayability. There's so many random events that can occur and so much randomness just in general that can happen that it makes a wonderful experience, regardless of if you're playing cooperatively with more than one person, or you can even play solo. You can play a couple characters by yourself, or if you're really feeling daring, you can play as one character and try your best, but that's not likely. So, why is it only an honorable mention and not on the main list? Well, the simple reason is that this is one of the games where if you don't have any of the expansions, then it sort of takes it down a notch. Not greatly, it's still a very playable game with only the base, but the expansions really make it worthwhile. And the expansions are what start to cost a lot more money. Now, for example, the newest expansion, In the Lab, adds a specific solo mechanic to the game, which is very interesting, and it adds a couple other interesting, not techniques, but mechanics as well. That being said, both expansions add new roles for you to play, new special cards, not necessarily viruses, new diseases, whatever it happens to be. But even so, the base game by itself, however many players you've got, is a wonderful game, great co-op game, a lot of fun to play, and a lot of replayability. So that's why Pandemic is one of my honorable mentions. My second honorable mention is another great game, but in this case, it's one that's also not competitive, but at the same time, it's also not cooperative. The game is Race for the Galaxy. The reason I say it's not competitive is because more often than not, it isn't. This game is more of a game of multiplayer solitaire. Every single person is sitting there doing their own thing, and there's very little, if any, player interaction. The only way you really get to the player interaction is if you add on the expansion that adds in the war mechanic, which is not necessarily a good idea in my opinion. I don't like the war mechanic. That being said, this is a very inexpensive game, and you do get a ton of great replayability with this. It's a lot of fun, and it's a lot of fun with however many number of players you've got. In the case of the base game, it's 2 to 4 people, and it's also a very quick game once everybody understands what all of the individual little symbols mean, how the turns work, all of that kind of stuff. It goes very fast. But even so, again, it's a lot of fun, but just like with Pandemic, the base game by itself doesn't really do a whole lot. Once you start getting the expansions, it really begins to add up very quickly. The first expansion, just like with Pandemic, adds solo rules, which are convoluted to say the least, but still a lot of fun to play. And at the same time, though, it does raise up that cost a little bit. But just the base game by itself, very inexpensive, but still very fun to play. It's just that the expansions add so much to the game, it's hard to not want to go out and buy those. So that's why Race for the Galaxy is one of my honorable mentions. At number 5, I've got a game that takes us back to the ye olde Middle Ages. The game is Guildhall. The idea behind this is that you're creating a chapter within a guild that you're trying to attract the tailors and the builders and all of those kinds of people to you rather than to your opponents. It's a wonderful game with various different types of player interaction, including being able to steal people from one another. It's a victory point card based game, so whoever has the most points at the end wins. And there are some wonderful, minute strategies to it about when should you use this power, should I try to take their person or try to get a new one on my own, all of those kinds of things. It makes for some really amazing replayability, and the game is relatively easy to pick up, although there are some minor rule nuances that can be a little bit difficult to remember, especially at first. That being said, that's one of the reasons why it's closer to the bottom of the list, because it's not quite as easy to pick up and just go and play as some of the other games. But at the same time, it is a card-based game, so it's really inexpensive, very cheap, but you definitely get your money's worth without a doubt. So that's why Guildhall is my number 5. At number 4, I've got another game from my favorite publisher of all time, Z-Man Games. The game is Wasabi. Right? Again, this is an inexpensive game that is exceedingly easy to pick up. It's very, very simple. All that you do is you pick your recipes, you pick your ingredients, and you're all sharing the giant bamboo sheath to try to take all of the ingredients and put them in order so that you can make all of your sushi rolls. It's a ton of fun, and there's a lot of replayability due to the randomness aspect of the game. There's all sorts of different things that can happen. You can have different ingredients, you get different rolls, all of that kind of thing. Do you try to go for the really big rolls, or do you stick with doing a lot of the smaller rolls at once? All of those kinds of things. There's a lot of really good small strategies in it. It's a lot of fun to play, very, very replayable, easy to learn, and you can play it with anywhere from 2 to 4 people, and it plays very, very easily, again, regardless of how many players you have. That being said, it is a fairly condensed game, for lack of a better term, and while there is a decent amount of strategy to it, eventually it does run out, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that, unlike some of the other games, you don't have as much replayability that I think it could have. So that's why Wasabi is my number 4. At number 3, I've got a wonderful game that helps us travel all the way across the ocean to Japan. And what better reason to go to Japan other than to destroy it? The game is King of Tokyo. Now, who has ever not wanted to be Godzilla? Go in and destroy a bunch of stuff and just go, roar! Tons and tons of fun. It's something that nobody could ever not want to do. And in this particular case, this is a wonderful game for actually a surprising number of people. You can play this with up to 6 people, and I think it plays almost as well with 2 as it does with 6. It's wonderful scaling, and not only that, but the rules are so easy. It's a single page of rules front and back, and that's it. That's the entirety of the rules. The one thing is that the main mechanic for this game is dice rolling, which I am not a huge fan of, but at the same time, I think the game does a lot to really mitigate the luck factor involved with it by adding in special powers and things like that that you can use. Again, it's a relatively inexpensive game, which is wonderful. It's won a ton of awards, from gaming innovation to design to all sorts of playability and all kinds of things. Wonderful game, and this one actually has an expansion that you can get that adds even more special abilities, which makes it that much cooler. I actually don't own it because I think that the base game by itself is really, really fun, and again, tons of replayability, a lot of fun, and it also has a great deal of strategy involved with, should you go in, should you try to attack the city, or should you pull back and let other people try to do it. So, with all that, King of Tokyo is my number 3. At number 2, I've got a game from one of my other favorite publishers of all time, Fantasy Flight. Now, Fantasy Flight is very, very famous for being the type of company that, for lack of a better term, makes very expensive games. This being a video on inexpensive games, I happen to have one of the best games in their catalog, in my opinion, that is also extremely inexpensive, and it is Citadels. This is a wonderful role-picking game where you and up to 7 other people each go and you pick an individual role that you will be playing for that particular round. It's a lot of fun, and there's a ton of intrigue and strategy and pretty much everything else that you want to see in a board game in a very small, compact card game. The whole point is that you're trying to build X number of buildings in order to finish off the game to hopefully win it. And you get victory points based on how big the buildings are and how quickly you did and how well you did with your color matching, essentially. But that being said, again, there's a lot of really great intrigue and strategy with if you're going to pick a specific role, then what if you're going to be targeted by another person who got the assassin or the thief? You can lose your turn, you can lose all your money, all sorts of stuff can happen, and it's a lot of fun. And it's just a wonderfully made game, and this particular version also includes an expansion with it, which has not only the base game, but it also has additional buildings to build, and it also has an entire different set of people that you can play as, different roles that essentially replace the old ones, which really keeps you coming back for more and more and having a great deal more replayability, simply because it's essentially like a different game whenever you play with the new roles. And other than that, obviously, when you play with either different people or even just playing different rounds in different games, it is always different. There's always something new to play. So that's why Citadels is my number 2. Finally, at number 1, I have an iteration of a game that's been around for several decades. The original game is the Settlers of Catan, and the new game is the Struggle for Catan. Now, this is a wonderful card-based game based off of the Settlers of Catan. One of the great things that I love about this game is that you can play it with only 2 people. Normally with the Settlers of Catan, you need at least 3. But for this, you need 2, and I believe it's between 2 and 4 people, and it plays very well with any number in between that range. One of the best things that I was really surprised by is they did a wonderful job of still maintaining a lot of the original strategy and intrigue and capabilities from the Settlers of Catan with the Struggle for Catan. You still have all of the different building types. You can still have the sort of screw you type of actions to other players. All of those kinds of things, but in a much more compact, smaller box that you can take anywhere you go. It's a card-based game, so you don't need the giant board that you have to build every single time. All of this kind of stuff. Now, that being said, there are things like the travel-size version of the Settlers of Catan, which isn't bad, but I personally am just not a fan of travel-size sets for full games. If it's me, I prefer to have a full game in a smaller, compact version than have a full game, a large game, that was tried to squeeze into a smaller space. I just think it works less and it really loses some of the magic. In the case of the Struggle for Catan, though, you still have a lot of the magic of the Settlers of Catan, which I really love. It's a wonderful game. It's a lot of fun to play. It's great to play with different people. It's great to play with people who have played the Settlers of Catan. It's great to play with people who have never played it. It's a decently long game. You have a lot of strategy behind it. But just like Settlers, it's an easy game to pick up, but it's very difficult to learn. So that's why the Struggle for Catan is my number 1 inexpensive game to get the bang for your buck. That's it for me, everybody. Thank you very much for watching my video on inexpensive games that give you the most bang for your buck. They're not expensive monetarily, but you still get all of the replayability and the flexibility of some of the largest and most expensive games on the market. So, with that, thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you next time.